If we want to bring ourselves or other people closer to Hashem, we have to have a certain simplicity and humility, which we will learn from the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, specifically from how Rashi understands the nature of what clothing the Kohen Gadol had to wear when he went into the Holy of Holies. So B'tchilas Pasha saying at the beginning of our Pasha Acharei Vos Vert itself, where the Torah tells us, Vayomer Hashem Moshe Dabal Aaron Gomer, Moshe tells Aaron, Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron, V'al Yovoy B'chol Eisel HaKodesh Gomer, that you as the Kohen Gadol may not enter the Holy of Holies whenever you please. And when you do B'zois Yavai Aaron HaKodesh, there's a procedure that you have to follow. Then, Shteit in Pasuk, after that, the Pasuk says, Kesoines Bad Kodesh Yil Bosh Gomer, that he has to wear a shirt, tunic, which is made of holy linen. Rashi picks out those words and tells us, on his Mefarish, he says, Magid, this means that the Pasuk is teaching us that the Kohen Gadol does not do the service inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim wearing his full 8-garment uniform, which he would wear even on Yom Kippur when he was doing other avodas outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And the reason is sheyesh b'hem zahav, because those other 8 garments include gold. And the reason is something that brings accusatory evidence against the Jewish people. Gold, which reminds us of the Egel Hazav, cannot defend us on the day that we're looking for atonement. And therefore, Elabar Ba'ah, he serves in the Kodesh HaKadoshim with only 4 parts of the uniform, 4 clothes, which is Kohen Hedjet, like a regular Kohen, Ve'kolon Shabutz, and all of those 4 garments are made out of linen. What's Rashi trying to tell us? The Pasha says that Pshat and Pirush Rashi, what would appear to be the simplest understanding of Rashi's messages, he's coming to explain to us, that here the Torah gives us the instruction about the clothes that the Kohen Gadol has to wear, that it's these cotton garments, and they are holy garments, and he has to wear them during the service. It sounds like the Torah is giving us information that is new information. And that's surprising because we actually know this information already from before. All the way back in Pashas Tetzaveh, a whole book of the Torah ago, we were already given this information. We were told what the uniforms are and when they're worn. We were given the instruction to make uniforms for the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol. And on side also the fact that the Kohanim have to wear the appropriate uniform at the appropriate times when they are serving in the Beis HaMikdash, as the Torah says, when they come into the holy place, or when they serve at the Mizbeach, and they shouldn't chas v'shalom carry the sin of being underdressed, which is actually a capital offense. So therefore the question it would appear that Rashi has to answer is, what new information are we getting at this point in the Torah where we're told that Hashem tells Moshe to tell Aaron, make sure that you wear the uniform when you serve in the Beis HaMikdash, or in the Mishkan in those days, on Yom Kippur? Surely we know this already. Is Rashi Mevor. So that's what Rashi comes to explain. As der Pasuk kommt aus Zogen, this Pasuk adds further information. Magid, it's coming to teach us. Nicht auszurechnen die bigde Kehuna und dem Zivei, as mit Avzionton, wenn man geht rein zu tun die Avodah BaKodesh. It's not telling us information we already know, that there are specific garments for the Kohanim, and in this case the Kohen Gadol, and that he has to wear those garments while on duty. Nor, rather, the Torah over here is being very specific. As a dafonton place, di begodim, it's narrowing it down and telling us that when the Kohen Gadol is in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he only wears these simple white garments of the regular Kohen, or niti shmoine begodim, and not the full fancy uniform of the Kohen Gadol, which has 8 components. As in Zeh is Ar Meshamash Alamol. Even though earlier in Parashat Tetzaveh we learned that that's what the Kohen Gadol typically wears when he is serving in the Mishkan or subsequently in the Beis HaMikdash. So that's what it would appear. Right? Rashi's just telling us we're not getting the information we've already heard before. We're getting new information that on Yom Kippur, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he's limited only to these 4 garments. Question is, we have to understand that word magid does not seem to fit. Tevas magid in Pirush Rashi, usually when Rashi uses that word magid, is usually the word magid is, this pasuk is telling us something that you wouldn't see obviously in the pasuk. So, no magid. the pasuk kommt zogen a gewisse Sach. You've got to kind of read between the lines in a sense and understand what the pasuk wants to convey to us. In addition to what it's telling us, obviously. Now, in this case, if Rashi's message is just to tell us that he wears 4 garments going into the Kodesh HaKadosh on Yom Kippur, where's the surprise? That is stated clearly in the pasuk. It's done it verstandig, so it doesn't make sense. The fact that the Kohen Gadol in the Kodesh HaKadoshim only wears 4, not 8 garments, steht beferish in the pasuk. That's clear in the pasuk. You don't need a magid for that. Magid, besides what's obvious in the pasuk, it's also teaching us something else. No, this is obvious in the pasuk. In addition to which, we have to understand the language that Rashi chooses. So at the end of his biur, Rashi uses words, that instead of wearing the 8 garments, he wears 4, like a regular kohen, and they're all made out of linen. Why do we need all that information? The first question is, the pasuk lists 4 garments. So what does Rashi have to tell us? Tell us it's 4 garments. Well, I could see that. I read the pasuk. I could tell. Number 2, Beis Vos is a most mechadish Kohen headed. And what's the big surprise that Rashi is telling us? These 4 garments are like a regular Kohen. And based on shame from free in Pashas Tetzaveh, we already know back from Pashas Tetzaveh, as a Kohen headed, that a regular Kohen wears 4 begodim. So what's the surprise? If the Kohen Gadol is wearing 4, we know that's like a Kohen headed. And even if for whatever reason you needed to point it out to us, the question is, why? What practical difference will it give us in our understanding or in the halachic application of this law to know that the Kohen Gadol wearing 4 garments is like a regular Kohen? And out of a kulin shabutz, why does it have to tell us that they're made out of linen? Steht beferish im pasuk by jeden von 7 begodim, as soll sein von bad. The pasuk said garment by garment that each one is bad, which is linen. Was is Hashem meiser v'kulin shabutz? So what's Rashi adding to say? And they're all made out of linen. Well, that's what the pasuk said. So our first attempt is going to be to say that Rashi wants to avoid a misinterpretation of the pasuk that we might have had. Lechaera wollte man gegen lernen, as Rashi kommt shelos an gar and under pirish. Could be that you would imagine that Rashi wants to negate a misguided understanding of the pasuk. Learning the pasuk at face value. And we might have understood the pasuk as follows. From Parshas Tetzaveh, seeing as we already know from Parshas Tetzaveh, that Aaron, as a Kohen Gadol, which is unique, has special clothes that he has to wear, and the purpose of those clothes is there to bring extra covered honor and beauty, glory to him. So if that's what makes the Kohen Gadol special, and that's what makes his avodah special, it seems illogical that you remove those clothes to go into a special place on a special day. How does it follow logically then that once a year on Yom Kippur you go into the Holy of Holies? He's only going to wear 4 of his uniform clothes, and not the 4 additional ones, removing or diminishing his honor and his glory. Doesn't it make sense to say the exact opposite? So you would imagine, hang on a second, we expect that the Kohen Gadol going into such a holy place on such a holy day should be looking his finest. Which would have then led us to misinterpret the pasuk. As der pasuk kommt nicht sagen, as davon nur die 4 begodim. Don't understand that the pasuk is saying only these 4 simple clothes that are listed in the pasuk are the ones that he wears. Warum says poshet as davon mikol came from a ganz year alle shmeine begodim? Because logic dictates that if all year round he's supposed to wear the full regalia of the 8 garments, then definitely on Yom Kippur. So, which is actually the perspective that certain of the other commentators take. So what's this pasuk coming to tell us? Not to say he wears 4, not 8 garments, but rather, der pasuk kommt sagen, dem shini should be a makipurim, but rather it's telling us something different about the material of these 4 simple garments. As the daled begodim davon sein damos be a makipurim, anders that the 4 garments that the Kohen Gadol had to wear as part of his uniform on Yom Kippur were different to the rest of the year. How so? Agans your sein and die daled begodim wie gesagt in Parshas Tetzaveh. Well, you go back to Parshas Tetzaveh and you hear how it is that they fashioned these 4 garments. Hakasones sheish umitznefes sheish v'avnei gomer given sheish moshzar. They were interwoven with 6 different threads and strands in order to make each thread of the garment. Mashenkin Darby and Makipurim is, whereas here in Yom Kippur it sounds like the pasuk is highlighting something else. Ksoines bad singular, Michnesei bad, Avnei bad gomer, over mitznefes bad gomer. Nit sheish mosh zar nor ein chut. Maybe that's what the Torah wants us to know. Not how many garments he wears, because that's always going to be 8, but what kind of garments he wears. That the so-called white garments, which are the same as what the regular Kohen wears, in this case are threaded differently, they're sewn differently from the regular garments. Und der Rebbe read the pasuk nach wegen der Levisha von die Dalet begodim, and that's why the pasuk only speaks about these 4, because it's telling us where the difference lies, not to tell us he's limited only to wearing these 4 garments. Says Rashi, that's how you might have misinterpreted the pasuk. And das is Rashi Shelek, and that's what Rashi wants to negate. And how does he negate it? Mitzayim Pirish Magid Chulei, by telling us it's coming to teach us that he wears 4 garments, and they're like a regular Kohen, and they're all made out of linen. Need we hat gekent linen, as the pasuk is not for dem shinoi, not to misinterpret the pasuk as saying the nature of how these garments is made is what's different. But is not indeed dalet begodim, and that's only a distinction between the 4 regular white garments of the Kohen Hedyot and of Yom Kippur. And not to imagine that the Torah wants us to exclude the other 4. Rather, Rashi says, let's clarify. The message of the Torah is specifically to say that the Kohen Gadol does not wear his fancy gold clothes when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. The pasuk kommt Shelek zayin di begodim shum meshamish bohem b'chutz. The Torah is specifically excluding the garments that he would wear on Yom Kippur while doing his other avodas outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Ella be'arbo Kohen Hedyot, and emphasizing that inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim he's only wearing 4 garments and only like a Kohen Hedyot. Sounds like an interesting or very applicable explanation, except it doesn't resolve the word magid, as we'll see in a moment, and in fact even seems to highlight the opposite of what Rashi is saying. It's not an easy explanation to accept. First of all, that doesn't clarify why Rashi uses the word magid, which is to say, you've got to read into the pasuk to understand what the pasuk's really telling you. Because ultimately, if you're taking this angle where you're negating the possibility of thinking that you wear all 8 garments, and Rashi is just highlighting that the pasuk says you wear 4 garments, well, the pasuk did say that. All Rashi would then be doing is negating a misunderstanding of the pasuk. So you don't have to say the word magid for that. The word magid implies there's more to the pasuk than what it meets the eye. But besides that is nosef of them, the sim from Pirish Rashi Kohen Hedyot v'kulan shel butz. The way Rashi wraps up his commentary by saying these 4 garments are like the regular Kohen and they are all made out of linen is nitnar ibrik. Not only does that now emerge as unnecessary information, because all Rashi really wanted to do apparently was reject another misunderstanding. Well, then I don't have to know what the material is that these garments are made of. But beyond that, it's actually emphasizing the exact opposite of what we're trying to claim that Rashi is saying. The fact that Rashi is saying it's the 4 garments, all of linen, makes you pay attention to the 4 garments, which are in fact mentioned in the pasuk as kulan shel butz, that they're all made out of linen. Heipach an allem Pirish Rashi, as the Chiddush from pasuk is blows in the Vasatrog nit the under afir b'gidei zav. That's exactly the opposite, it would appear, to what Rashi wants to tell us. Rashi's message is 4, not 8. So why then is Rashi emphasizing the nature of the 4 garments, which actually sounds a little bit more like the explanation we wanted to reject? So we're not yet clear on why Rashi is picking out of this pasuk and saying magid is going to tell us something we didn't necessarily know, and that is that the Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKadosh on Yom Kippur only wears 4 garments, which is like a Kohen, and it's made out of linen. So rather what's bothering Rashi is the placement of this pasuk rather than the implication of this pasuk. Is the Biribos, explanation is this. Rashi here is addressing a question which immediately crops up in the pasuk, namely, why is this pasuk, which describes the clothing that the Kohen Gadol has to wear, placed at this part of the story? Logically, you would have expected it to be either you describe the uniform of the Kohen Gadol before you get into the details of what he would do on Yom Kippur. So before you get into any of the avodah, any of the korbanos, tell us what he's going to wear. In that Friedeke pasuk, which in our case would be 1 pasuk sooner, Oder nachdem the pasuk rechnet is die alle avodas was hat gedacht, or alternatively wait until you've listed all of the different services that the Kohen Gadol has to perform on Yom Kippur in the Mishkan, subsequently Beis Hamikdash, and then Zayin de Getanim de Begodim, then tell us, and he has to wear this uniform when he did all of those avodas. The fact that the Torah placed this pasuk straight after it said, this is what the Kohen Gadol needs in order to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Bepar ben boker lechatos. He has to bring a bull as his personal sin offering. Ve'ayl le'oila. And he has to bring a ram as his personal oila offering. Voldmen bepashtas gerent. So your mind is naturally going to say, hang on a second, you've just identified two unique korbanos that are only for the Kohen Gadol. And now you're telling me about his uniform. There must be a link. So your mind would say, logically, the juxtaposition of the two special korbanos that only the Kohen Gadol brings on Yom Kippur, and the uniform, which is only for begodim, sounds like he has to reduce his uniform to the 4 garments only when he's performing those 2 korbanos. And the logic will be because these are the special avodas that are unique to him personally as the Kohen Gadol in order to do what he has to do in the Beis Hamikdash, and that's why he's going to wear simple clothes at that time. Aber, that's what you'd think. Aber von die psukim weiter is klar, but when you learn further the next few psukim, you suddenly start to realize, as alle first you realize, oila soy, that unique oila offering that the Kohen Gadol has to bring, the eile oila, wer getan in andere begodim. The Torah says clearly that he wears his full 8-garment uniform in order to bring that korban. Ve'lo vash as begodov, the Torah tells us, he has to wear his uniform. Which Rashi says his uniform is his regular 8-garment uniform from the rest of the year. So it's very clear in the Torah itself that for his personal ayil la'oila, he has to wear his full 8 garments. Beis, as the Alavidas Piz say, it's also clear that whatever is discussed up until that point where he's told Velo Vashas Begodov to put on his uniform. So what other avodah is discussed? The 2 goats that have to be brought as a chatas offering, for Nadas Bnei Yisrael on behalf of the Yidden, and the avodas hakteros as well as the ketores which he's going to bring into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Very nice gerechnet. Nach unser pasuk, there after our pasuk, which says v'zois yavai, that he's got to wear the 4 garments, and before v'lavashes begodim, before he puts on his uniform, so that implies that implies that those are avodas that he has to do when he's only wearing the 4 white garments. So out goes our theory that it's only when he's performing the specific korbanos that relate to him as a Kohen Gadol in his personal capacity that he has to wear the 4 begodim, because that's not what the Torah says. The Torah is very clear that for his ayla oila, he is wearing the gold, and for the sirizim and the ketores, which is not his personal things, he's wearing the white garments. So that's what's bothering Rashi. The placement of the pasuk does not seem to work with the logic of how you would expect to understand the pasuk. That's what Rashi has to explain. Magid, what you don't see clearly in the pasuk is that it is teaching us that it's if he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or as we'll see in a moment, if he's doing prep for the Kodesh HaKadoshim, then he cannot wear the 8 garments, because the 8 garments are reserved only for any avodah which is done outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Why is he using the word magid? Because the simplest first understanding you would have of the pasuk is that it sounds like it's his korbanos that require those 4 white garments. Sai de chatos on sai di oila. The chatos, which we're going to see, is with 4 garments, and even the oila, which we're going to see, is with 8 garments. Is the Pirshnita, so therefore Rashi has to say, don't misunderstand the pasuk. Now the pasuk comes sagen, the Torah is not talking about which avodah he wears the uniform for, but rather where he is when doing that avodah that will determine which uniform he's wearing. And therefore his personal ayil, which he's bringing as an oila, in spite of the fact that it's his personal korban, which makes you believe that the Torah is telling us he has to wear the 4 garments for his personal avodah. Well, guess what? It's outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so therefore he wears the full 8 garments. Whereas, on the other hand, what happens next, the fact that he has to sprinkle the blood of the 2 goats inside on the pareches, or towards the aron, Und die Ketores, and the Ketores which has to bring inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, is the Chalz Bifnim, that is all Avodah which is done inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, or the Tzerich Pnim, or certain steps of that Avodah is to prepare himself in order to do Avodah inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, of Hamela, Verenz Gitonin, De Abba, Begodnim, Rashi's Chidush is, that is the determiner of when he wears only 4 garments, when he's either in or preparing to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Und das Kufa ist der Tam, was in den Begodim steht auf Gadol noch im Pasuk Bezois Yava Aaron ala Kodesh Gomer, and that explains the placement of the Pasuk. When the Torah told us this is how Aaron is going to enter the holy place, then it tells us, and this is what he's going to wear. Need for alle karbonos. It certainly is not going to tell us that he wears the 4 begodim before he gets into all of the karbonos, because a number of those karbonos are going to be done also in the gold clothes, the full uniform. Und it's später nach dem Sinn für die Karbonos Michadim von Yom Kippurim, nor is it going to tell us this information after it's given us all of the avodas, because again that could mislead us into thinking that it's a matter of which avodah he's doing that's going to determine what he wears, and that's not the case. It's a matter of where he's going to be. Mit dem sagt der Pasuk, what the Torah is telling us is, as die Levisha von die 4 begodim, that wearing only 4 garments is not mitzad avodas hayom von Yom Kippurim. It's not because today's Yom Kippur and it's a holy day, and therefore you've got to have simplicity and wear the 4 begodim. Now mitzad bezois yovoi Aaron el hakodesh. The Torah tells us clearly this is how Aaron goes into the holy place, otherwise known as the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then it tells us with only 4 garments, framing it clearly that the 4 garments is only for avodas pnim. The chidush from Yom Kippurim, the shimush bifnim, those unique things which are only ever performed on Yom Kippur and only ever performed inside the holy sanctum. The shimush bifnim kenetzayin mitshmeina begadim shemashamish behem b'chutz, and therefore Rashi is telling us, the Torah wants us to know that when the Kohen Gadol is working inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he cannot wear the uniform that he wears during the rest of the year or outside of the base, outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And in fact, Rashi is telling us the Torah is not distinguishing here between Yom Kippur and any other day on the calendar, but rather between the Kodesh HaKadoshim and any other place in the Beis HaMikdash. With that information, that also answers another question which Rashi doesn't even seem to address. Why does Rashi not address what seems to be a very obvious question? You're telling me that the reason he can't wear the gold when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim is en kategor nasa sanegar. Okay, surely that's something we should be wary of the whole of Yom Kippur. Because something which carries guilt or accusation against the Jewish people cannot be used in a process of atoning for us. On the far the Kohen Gadol big day Zov, which is why the Kohen Gadol may not wear garments that include gold when he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Obvious question is, how come in the rest of the Beis HaMikdash on this holy special day of atonement he can wear those garments? The rest of the year it's not a big question. Even at a time when the Kohen Gadol is doing something that is to atone for himself or for the Jewish people, will explain the whole issue of avoiding anything that conjures up negative associations for the Jewish people. That's only something we worry about on Yom Kippur. Why? Because the whole theme and energy and essence of the day of Yom Kippur, as the name implies, is atonement. Which would explain why this is a day to be particularly cautious, not to allow any accusatory energy into the room on that day. Fine. So the rest of the year we can get away with understanding why the Kohen Gadol can wear gold clothes even when he's doing Kapara. But if this is the day of Yom Kippur and it's avodah of Yom Kippur, it doesn't make sense. The ganze avodah Yom Kippurim, everything that is done as part of the service of Yom Kippur, whether it is inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim or in the rest of the Beis HaMikdash, surely we should avoid gold at all costs and not involved in any part of Yom Kippur. The Birbozeh ongedeit in dem, was der Pasuk is is bad Gomer, kommt behemshach zum Pasuk bezeis Yahweh Aaron Gomer. So Rashi doesn't have to address this because he says it's already clear from the Pasuk where the Torah placed the lesson that the Kohen Gadol only wears 4 garments after bezeis Yahweh Aaron, that it's telling us isn't the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That will clarify everything for us. When introducing us to this unique service of Yom Kippur, the Torah uses the words, these are the elements and rituals that the Kohen Gadol has to employ in order to do his service. Lentons, the pasuk, the Torah is telling us that the nekuda for Yom Kippurim is neat. The avodas hayom. The Torah is at that point clarifying for us not only what Aaron has to do, but what the core and essence of Yom Kippur is. It's not about all of the rituals as much as nar yovoi Aaron el hakodesh the knisa lekodesh hakadoshim. You want to capture the essence of Yom Kippur, you will capture it in the fact that the Kohen Gadol enters the kodesh hakadoshim. On dos bring the kapara shel Yom Kippurim. It's the Kohen Gadol being in the Kodesh HaKadoshim that facilitates the great and unique atonement of Yom Kippur. So sein es darf zu sein. Now, in order for the Kohen Gadol to be permitted and successful going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, darf es sein bezois. There are various steps that he has to go through, karbanos that he has to bring, avodas that he has to do, sai bifnim, sai b'chutz, some of them in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, some of them out of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, v'de'ay la'oila, for example, his own personal korban of the ram that he's bringing as an oila is a critical part of the service, but it's outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Made us verstandig, as the Bavornish von Enkategen. Therefore, the big concern that we want to avoid of conjuring up negative associations on such a day is be'iken dem ot from the kapara for Yom Kippurim. It's not something that is a problem on the day. It's something we don't want to have in the place that is the epicenter of atonement in the avodah bifnim, in the avodah that the Kohen Gadol is doing inside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now, Baldas Rashi is a chiddush from Pasuk Senes Bad Gomer in the Shlila. Now, what Rashi has shown us, and this is really important for the understanding of the rest of the Sikha, what Rashi has shown us is that the Pasuk over here is dafka excluding the other four garments which are unique to the Kohen Gadol when he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. As bifnim tormenit mishamesh zaymi de bigdei zav. And Rashi's whole thesis is that the Kohen Gadol may not wear the bigdei zav when he goes into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and he gives a reason why not. Valein katega nases aneger, because any accusatory energy does not belong in a place of defense. Is nikratik, that doesn't necessarily sit so easily and smoothly. Why not? Because when we learn the psukim in Parshas Tetzaveh, when we go back to the original time, we're told about the Big Day Kahuna in Parshas Tetzaveh. We see that the Torah makes it very clear that we have to be absolutely scrupulous that we're wearing, that the Kohen or the Kohen Gadol is wearing the right things, in order that the way we do our avodah in the Beis Hamikdash is in the most honorable and respectful way. Biz, that is so serious as a meshamish mechusa begodim misa, that if a person, a Kohen or a Kohen Gadol, would serve in the Beis Hamikdash missing one of the parts of the uniform, they would deserve chas v'shalom. And vi kumtes, if that's such a serious part of the avodah that you have to wear this uniform, and without it, there's the most dire consequences. Logically, how does it then work? And because we're afraid of some kind of a negative association with gold, that is reason enough to allow the Kohen Gadol not to be in his most honorable and beautiful uniform. And that's going to be a reason to tell him not to wear all the begodim that he's required by halacha to wear. We can add another thing to that. Had we learnt that on Yom Kippur there is a special law about the uniform of the Kohanim, which is, as the Kohen Gadol daf torgan and under suga begodim, that the Kohen Gadol has to wear a completely different uniform to the rest of the year, which is actually, if you think about it, what we do on Yom Kippur, we wear a kittel, which we don't wear the rest of the year. So if that had been the case, it wouldn't be such a big question. Because they would say simply, the whole year round, the law is the Kohen Gadol's uniform has 8 pieces. And the same Torah says that the Yom Kippur uniform for a Kohen Gadol is 4 garments, and that would be fine, but that's not Rashi's approach. But seeing as Rashi does not come from the perspective to say, the Torah is telling us that the Kohen Gadol has a unique Yom Kippur uniform. Says no farna isa to trogn big days of Yom Kippurim, but rather Rashi's whole approach is that the Torah is telling us the Kohen Gadol has to exclude the other 4 golden elements of his uniform. Kasha, that's a big question. Safe, whichever way you look at it, as the Kohen Gadol, the Torah is forcing the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur to have a missing uniform. How does that work? That's why Rashi added words which initially we thought were just additional and unnecessary in his commentary. They're actually critical in his commentary. He's framing it for us as the Kohen Gadol that when on Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol is only wearing 4 garments, that is like a regular Kohen. In other words, the fact that in the Kodesh HaKadoshim the Kohen Gadol is only wearing 4 of his garments, it's nicht der Pshat as a tragt vier von seine 8 begodim. It doesn't mean the Kohen Gadol has 8 elements to his uniform that he's supposed to wear, and now he's only wearing 4 of them, because that is mechusar begodim. Now, rather in that role, he takes on the status of a regular Kohen, and a regular Kohen, his full uniform is only 4 elements. So the Kohen Gadol is not missing anything, he's wearing his full uniform in the role of a regular Kohen. Which will also explain why Rashi has to then reinforce the fact that all 4 garments are made out of linen. At that point, Rashi is not only highlighting for us that there's no negative association with gold because these garments are only made out of linen. This is Rashi reinforcing for us that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is in the role and status of a regular Kohen. How do we know that? We'll use an example. Parshas Pekudei, which is another place that discusses the garments of the Kohanim, because Parshas Pekudei recaps all of the things that everybody did to contribute to the Mishkan. So there it tells us about the belt, the gartel, that the Kohen Gadol wore, as is gemach yivorin, that it was made of various materials, von sheish moshzor, usecheles, vargomon, v'selashoni, maseroikem. It's this whole weaving together of various colored, dyed, and different types of materials. In Parashat Tzava, where stated Tzivat Vasiyas Abegodim, let's just compare that for a moment to the original source of the instruction to have uniforms for the Kohen Gadol, for the Kohanim, which is in Parashat Tzava. State nor as Davnei Tavzai Ma'aseroikim. At that point, it only tells us that the gartel, the belt of the Kohen Gadol, has to be woven. Es sagt aber nicht dabei von welchen min oder minim wird gemacht, but it doesn't tell us anything about which material or materials would be used. Mashenke Vasiyas Abegodim in Pekudei state as Avnei Sha'aron Kohen Gadol is given from the minim anal. It's only when we get to Parshas Pekudei that we get this additional insight that the Kohen Gadol's belt was actually a mixture of a whole bunch of materials. Komtois, as Avnei Sha'aron is nicht nur from bad. So that implies that the belt of Aaron the Kohen Gadol is not only linen. And wie sagt der Pasuk Avnei bat Yachgor, so how come here in Parshas Acharei Mois does it tell us he's wearing a linen belt? Is davon gedrungen, als die Begodim seinen nicht die Bigdei Kohen Gadol, not das seinen der Boke Kohen Hedjet. That illustrates to us that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, unlike any other day on the calendar, is wearing 4 regular Kohen garments, and then of course the 4 additional Kohen Gadol garments which he wears at certain points. And Rashi nimmt on the Pshutishal Mikra, and therefore Rashi, taking the pasuk at its face value, says, as dosas the pasuk teltes of Neita Shal Aaron in Parshas Pekudei, the fact that in Parshas Pekudei the Torah does distinguish between the belt of the Kohen Gadol from the belt of the regular Kohen, and not only does it distinguish, but it only in Parshas Pekudei describes the belt of the Kohen Gadol and does not describe the belt of the regular Kohanim. Which is really interesting, because that same part of the Torah does tell us about the other garments that the regular Kohanim wore, so it's strange that it just leaves out the belt. It's because the Torah wants us to know at that point that the belt of the Kohen Gadol is different to the regular belt of the regular Kohen. The regular Kohen's belt is just plain linen, which is what Rashi is emphasizing here about what the Kohen Gadol is wearing on Yom Kippur, whereas the special belt of the Kohen Gadol is made up of various materials. Now, with this information, we're going to see a fascinating halachic distinction between the way that Rashi interprets how this all works, the Kohen Gadol and his uniform on Yom Kippur, versus the Rambam. This is one of the amazing halachic insights that you find in Rashi. Rashi is mechulak mit Rambam in dem Gadol from Big Day Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim. It emerges that Rashi has a different view to the Rambam on the nature of the clothes of the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur. So let's look at the Rambam. The Rambam sagt, Big Day Kohuna shloisha minim. The Rambam tells us there are 3 types of uniform for Kehanim. Big Day Kohen Hedyet, the regular 4 garments of a regular Kohen. Or Big Day Zahav, the special full uniform of the Kohen Gadol. Or Big Day Lavan, and the unique white garments that the Kohen Gadol wore only on Yom Kippur. In other words, the Shittas Rambam, Zayin the Big Day Lavan Shem Kippurim and under min begodim. In the Rambam's view, the white clothes that the Kohen Gadol wears on Yom Kippur are their own class of clothing. Netas is an isa zu tragen Big Day Zav b'fnim. Over made a bleiben beim Iben nor für von seine 8 begodim. The Rambam's view is not that he may not wear gold when he's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and therefore is only left with 4 white garments. Now, according to the Rambam, it's a whole new uniform in its own category of Big Day Kihuna. That's the Rambam's view. Rashi's Rashi's view is completely different. He may not wear the gold clothes inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and therefore, when he's wearing 4 garments only in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that is like a regular Kohen, not a unique Yom Kippur uniform. You're going to see that this then spills over into another area of difference between Rashi and the Rambam. The Rambam The Rambam defines that the white uniform of Yom Kippur, which he calls a unique uniform, is reserved for the unique avodas that are only on Yom Kippur. In other words, the Rambam's approach is that it is part of the halacha of the day of Yom Kippur that there are certain times the Kohen Gadol has to wear white clothing. And that immediately raises the question we mentioned at the beginning of the Sikha, which is the Eile Oila, the special aisle that the Kohen Gadol brings on his own behalf, which is unique only to Yom Kippur. On Eile Ha'am, and the chatas that he brings, the oil that he brings, the aisle that he brings as an oil on behalf of the community, those are unique only to Yom Kippur. Those are procedures that only happen on Yom Kippur. And those are things that he does not have to wear only 4 white garments for. So how is the Rambam going to address that? We'll have to leave that for another conversation. But the point is that the Rambam is defining the nature of the uniform as built into the nature of the day and its rituals. Whereas Rashi, Rashi says the pshat of the pasuk is much simpler. When you're in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you wear white clothing. When you're outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, you put on the rest of the uniform. It says not in dem ort von der avodah. It has nothing to do with what you're doing, rather with where you're doing it. So it doesn't matter that today is Yom Kippur. It's if you're in the Kodesh HaKadoshim or not. Anything that's happening inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim or preparing for avodah in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, is what the Kohen Gadol has to wear only white clothes for. The reason is, as Rashi said, or as we've learned from Rashi, the linchpin that makes Yom Kippur work and that atones for the Jewish people is the Kohen Gadol being inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's what counts the most. That's where he has to avoid ein kategonasis haneger. And all the other details, all the other rituals and karbonis, etc., that he had to do are only to facilitate him getting into the Kodesh HaKadoshim effectively and achieving what he needs to achieve. So now these 2 points that we've shown, the distinction between the Rashi and the Rambam, actually are codependent. First of all, Rashi's view, which is wearing white clothes, is the exclusion of the rest of the uniform. Whereas the Rambam says wearing white clothes is a positive contribution to the what he calls the special uniform of Yom Kippur. That's point 1. And the other dispute, which is, according to the Rambam, wearing white clothing is associated with doing a ritual that belongs to Yom Kippur. According to Rashi, wearing white clothes has to do with doing a ritual which is inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Zayin tolu sebozeh. The reasoning behind these 2 distinctions is linked. If you go with the Rambam's approach, that there is an imperative to wear a special white uniform on Yom Kippur, well, logic would be if the Torah is telling you that you have to wear a certain uniform on a certain day, must be because of the nature of the day and what you do on that day. Azai is a dim yucham from big day loven. A pratin david mecheres from them talk, and the logic will be simple. Part of how to serve as a Kohen is to wear special clothes. So therefore, if it's a special avodah, there's a unique uniform to go with it. Whereas if you go according to Rashi's perspective, the inyan from Big Love is that inyan shlidi, where the whole reason he's wearing 4 garments is to ensure that he's not wearing gold. So it's about exclusion. As Torah nitzan big days of, you can't have gold. Then it wouldn't be logical to say the nature of the day is to exclude certain garments. But rather it makes more sense to say there's a certain place that cannot, so to speak, tolerate having gold because gold is objectionable in that place. And that gives us a beautiful lesson from the Perishashot Hashem, a beautiful instruction and lesson in our lives. When a Jew wants to reach the point of what Yom Kippur represents, to be purified in front of Hashem, whether it's about myself, that I want to be in the good books or connected or have this pure relationship with Hashem, or whether it's I want to bring another Jew to that point. In practical terms, to bring myself or another person closer to the Eibishter, closer to Torah and mitzvahs. The first thing we have to know is, you want to come close to the Eibishter, you got to get into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You got to go into Pnim, into a more intimate setting, which means that means a person has to dig deep. A person has to discover, uncover, reveal the depths of their own neshama. And that empowers us to bring ourselves purity and to bring others purity. So that's the key, to get to the depth of our neshama, not just to throw around things and superficially, try and have some kind of growth. So how do we get to that point? And the weg is, how do we get in touch with the depths of our neshama? You've got to take off the gold clothes. You've got to take off the things that are, so to speak, our accolades and our greatness and our honor. As long as a person is conscious of their own self and their achievements and their talents, then a person is blocked from really connecting to the deeper meaning behind what the Eibishter wants from our world. But as soon as a person recognizes, I'm just a simple Kohen, need to be big day zov, I don't have big fancy golden clothing, not a big day lavon, I'm just wearing the ordinary white clothing, kulon shel boots, it's all made out of simple linen. That means that the person feels clearly and it radiates in his soul simplicity. That's what opens the gates to be able to go into the deeper sanctum. And that's what empowers us to be able to bring ourselves kapara, to be able to bring kapara to other people, purity to ourselves, bring other people to a state of purity. To the extent that, as the Kohen Gadol was able to achieve, it brings atonement to the individual, to his family, to the entire Jewish people, and obviously the ultimate atonement, ultimate purity with the coming of Mashiach now.